Hello and welcome to another episode of Ask the Consistory, a video podcast produced by the Confessional Orthodox Evangelical Lutheran Communion. I'm your host for this video, Reverend Jake Zabel of the St. John's Evangelical Lutheran Church located in Dalby, Queensland, Australia. So in today's episode, I'm going to be continuing my series on why do Lutherans baptize infants. Today we're going to go with part 2, looking at the relationship of baptism with circumcision. So let's begin. In order to understand the 3 reasons of why Lutherans baptize infants, we need to first understand the relationship between circumcision and baptism. In Colossians chapter 2 verse 13, Paul says to the Colossians that they were dead in their trespasses and were uncircumcised. Here Paul is connecting uncircumcision with them being dead in their sins. This is because of what circumcision meant for the Old Testament Jews. Circumcision was the sacrament of initiation for the Jews. It was part of the covenant that God had made between Abraham and his descendants. To be uncircumcised meant that you were outside of the people of God. In order to be welcomed into God's people, the men had to be circumcised. When Paul calls the Colossians uncircumcised, what he meant was that they were not part of God's people. The Council of Jerusalem in Acts 15 declared that Gentiles, that is, non-Jewish Christians, did not need to be circumcised in order to be Christian. So why does Paul then criticize the Colossians for not being circumcised? This is answered by Paul's comments in verse 11. Paul says that the Colossians were circumcised with a circumcision not made with hands, meaning that they were circumcised not physically, but spiritually. He refers to this circumcision as the circumcision of Christ, and in verse 12 connects this circumcision of Christ with baptism. What Paul meant was that the Colossians were once dead in their sins and were uncircumcised, not only physically, but also uncircumcised spiritually. But now, through their baptisms, they have been made alive and born again through a spiritual circumcision. Therefore, even though they were not circumcised according to the flesh, they are circumcised according to the heart. See Jeremiah chapter 4 verse 4. See, God gave Abraham the practice of circumcision as a promise that from the seed of Abraham would come the Messiah. Circumcision symbolized the coming Messiah, who would come from Abraham's descendants. Jesus fulfilled this by being born a Jew, descended from Abraham. The promise that was given in circumcision was fulfilled by the birth of Jesus, and was no longer needed. Circumcision was to mark the Jewish people as God's chosen race from which the Messiah would come. Once he had come, this practice was no longer useful, since salvation was given not only to the Jewish people, but now to all peoples. Circumcision no longer served as a sacrament of initiation. Instead, between the resurrection and the ascension, Jesus instituted a new sacrament of initiation, the sacrament of holy baptism, which not only symbolized being washed clean, but in reality washed away our sins. See Acts chapter 2 verse 38 and 1 Peter chapter 3 verse 31. Baptism has now replaced circumcision as the new sacrament of initiation. Thus, for us Christians, it is baptism that makes us part of God's people. It is baptism that welcomes us into the covenant relationship with God. So, in order to better understand the 3 reasons for why we baptize infants, we need to keep in mind this connection of circumcision as the old sacrament of initiation with baptism as the new sacrament of initiation. For we baptize our infants for the same reason that the Jews circumcised theirs. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope you can join us again next time as we continue our series on why Lutherans baptize infants. In our next video, we'll get into reason 1 for why Lutherans baptize infants. If you'd like to have any of your questions answered by the consistory, you can email us at our email address, coelc-atc@hotmail.com. That's coelc-atc@hotmail.com. I've been your host, Reverend Jake Zabel. Goodbye, and God bless.